change the name at some point. I'm not sure. But yeah, it's been a long time since I put out a video like this. And I've been wanting to make some videos, put out some videos. And there's so much that I want to talk about, but it's almost hard to know where to begin again, because it's been like a year and a half since I've made any videos like this. And yeah, there's just so much that has happened. And I guess for me, everything I have gone through in the last few years since I started this channel, or since really before I started this channel, but anyways, I've been through a lot of really crazy things and really intense spiritual things and spiritual attacks, and I had open doors in my life from childhood trauma, and also from people I was around, things I was involved in. It can be a slippery slope, and like the frog in the boiling pot metaphor, I guess. But who you're around and the environments that you're in have a lot to do with shaping your worldviews and your values. And communities that I was a part of for many, many years, they became unrecognizable to me in a lot of ways. The values of people have changed drastically. I'm 40 now. I turned 40, and from my early 20s and stuff, when I started to meet people in different communities, through traveling, through activism and art, and DIY culture and music. When I first found those communities, there was something that felt like a real family, however dysfunctional, and a real community. And people had their issues, and there were definitely cliques and different groups, but I don't know, it was just more chill, down to earth. And then with the rise of social media and identity politics, and just the way that culture has gone, it became something else, and felt like popularity contests, and felt like having to perform, performativity, lack of authenticity, lack of like meaningful connection, meaningful conversations. And so there are many people in the communities that I miss and I think about and I pray for. And people that were close friends that I don't speak to now, and basically, other than YouTube, kind of got rid of social media, don't really engage with social media, at least for now. I might eventually come back to that, but it's been a big break from the life that I lived for many years. And I don't know, sort of being humbled by life in a way, and having things not work out my own way, trying to do things my own way, trying to heal, trying to grow, trying to, find a way to make money or generate income from some of my gifts, my spiritual, my creative gifts, but not really finding myself able to, compete in the world, and kind of seeing, how people really are behind the masks, and, what is really important to people. And it's just my values, like, are deeply, deeply instilled into me from childhood. And, at this point, with everything going on in the world, to me it's quite obvious more than ever that this is a spiritual battlefield, and that it's a spiritual war, and growing up I was quite bored, because of like having to go to church and having, not growing up with like a lot of money, and kind of having like old-fashioned, grandparents, and my grandpa was a preacher and like an evangelist and stuff, and I just remember being bored a lot at different times throughout my childhood, and kind of wishing that I could do more and do what other people were doing. But it's funny because, those things that you don't appreciate when you're a child, those hard lessons, and those kind of boring times, I don't know, it's like it created a foundation for me that I always come back to. It's very peaceful and quiet and still now that I can, see outside of the religious programming and the religious aspects of God and my relationship to God and Jesus as well, because that's kind of where it's at for me now. I've seen the world, and I knew from a young age I was exposed to certain things from a young age. I'm the oldest child. My family had quite a bit of generational traumas that I've had to battle directly, spiritual warfare my whole life, and having these realizations about the world and kind of seeing the kind of underground, the underbelly, and seeing the occult or hidden side of things that no one around me really knew or understood or could walk me through. And one of the things I've dealt with throughout my life, like I said, is like spiritual warfare. And even though my family's very Christian, they're very sweet people, but like I said, we have our own family traumas that impacted me and that, they're still being healed through. But overall, they raised me with a good foundation of the Bible. And I realized how, my relationship with God and my foundation and the prayers of my families, the prayers of my ancestors and grandparents and parents and all of those things have protected me all these years, where I've watched my friends, a lot of my favorite friends within my communities passed away, and rather young and tragically. And, watching people still go down these really, destructive paths that look fun and exciting, and that's the road to hell, right? It's gotta look good because, why would anybody go down that path? But it looks like what it is not, it's just an illusion. And, I don't know, I dealt with not just spiritual warfare, but targeted spiritual attacks for a long time as well. And all of this, and all of this information that I talked about for years and years and years, like try to tell people about things for years and years, to be met with like denial or, you're just too into conspiracy theories, blah, blah, blah. But it's all coming out and it's all true, and it's stuff that I've known about, tried to tell people about. Nobody cared or wanted to listen, or, maybe people are more involved or complicit than they like to admit or let on. And so I did deal with, what I feel and interpret to be targeting. And thankfully God has watched over me all this time. And I wandered into places that seemed, more innocent, but there are just snakes everywhere, really. But that's what led me back to God and to kind of walking away from the world and the life that I previously had. And I'm in a place where I feel like God's been kind of working on me, healing a lot of my religious trauma. I've always been a prayer, like I always pray, but I was mixing the spirits, I was never worshiping different gods other than God, but at the same time going in places where, Christians and people who work on God's team aren't welcome, and so unknowingly inviting a lot of negativity and hate towards myself. And so now, but I feel, I guess, more prepared in some ways for, what's going on, what's to come. And, for me, it's just so obvious that this world is run by the devil, the evil one, the deceiver, the accuser, and that it's, the occult is real. And, there's dabblers and there's people who are just kind of cursory involved and, don't take things so seriously. But like I said, it's a slippery slope, and there's a reason that we're not supposed to do certain things. There's a reason that humans are held to a higher standard than the animals, but some of the people out here who have the very like Darwinistic kind of mentality, they live by the law of the jungle, but humans, we're not allowed to live by the law of the jungle because we'll be judged. The other animals won't be judged because they don't have the higher cognitive functioning that we have. They don't have the capability for moral responsibility and accountability that humans have. And, there's just a lot of deception out there. And when you dabble in certain things and activities, like, you're inviting deception to dwell in and around you, which is why, it's why people like operate in groups, because they're under the same spiritual deceptions and illusions, and they have to continually reinforce that because it's not true. It's not based in reality. And so, when you're outside of it, when you're outside of the bubble, I guess, like when you see things differently, it's a threat because, again, the shared illusions or delusions have to be maintained. The image has to be maintained because it's not built on the truth, it's built on deception. And so, so it's been a lot to unravel, like, some of the ways that I was under deception, because I've always had God with me, I've always had Jesus with me from a child, and I knew that, which is why I always kept the prayer lines open. But I spent so many years feeling really confused by the people I was around, the situations I was in, not realizing how much like I opened myself up to that deception, through people I was around, environments I was in, and even things I was, practicing, thinking like that they're like harmless or helpful or something. Sorry, I just kind of have the awkward camera set up right now. So, it's just, like I said, it's just very obvious to me, considering like the things I've been through, like especially since COVID, like right around the beginning of COVID was when I started dealing with like the very like targeted spiritual warfare, and then just watching the cultural shifts and like the obsession with like satanic, demonic imagery. Back in the day it was kind of like this edgy thing. It was like punk and metal and these different bands, and now it's like pop music and country and rap, and everybody's using this same symbolism and imagery. And I started to read the Bible for myself because I started coming to the understanding like God is real, Jesus is real, spiritual warfare is real. And I learned about all this when I was a child, but I never, like the people around me, including like my family and church people, they didn't really focus on the spiritual warfare aspect of it. And I think, my family always says like I've always been the most like spiritual person in my family, the most like sensitive and empathic person in my family. And I've also been like the seer, and that I've known about a lot of this, dark stuff since a child, and been like just targeted since a child. And, to me, I feel like it was some sort of training that God brought me through, to, build me up so that I could fight in the spiritual war and have a solid foundation, but also know my enemy and course, I pray for my enemies, because my enemies were ones that I called friends for many years. It's not that I'm their enemy, it's that God is their enemy. And I hope that God is working on everyone's hearts to reveal the truth in these times where it's all being revealed. But let he who has eyes see, let he who has ears hear. You have to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear to get the message. And so I do pray for that, that people will hear, because God's word and God's law is written on our hearts, and we know the difference between right and wrong, but we've been so conditioned into believing otherwise, and we've had our egos fed so that we believe that truth is an individual right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with speaking your truth, as in telling your story and your testimony and how God came to you or brought you out of whatever hardship or darkness, or talking about your trauma, your story, your pain as the definition of my truth. But there is truth and there are lies, and there are things which are subjective and there are things which are law. And so, God, when God created this universe and everything in it, certain laws were set in place. And people get so overly emotional and turned it into some competition, or self-righteousness, holiness competition or something. It's just that there are laws. Like if you created a video game or a book, you have specific laws, you have scientific laws. So there are also spiritual laws as well. And humanity is in and has been in major violation of these laws for a very long time. And we have been given way out. We've been given a way out, Jesus Christ, and following his teachings. But, we chose a hard way. And again, there's a lot of deception. I believe we're living in the age of deception, the season of deception before the final judgment. I believe that the judgment already happened, and the millennial kingdom of Christ already reigned on the earth, and we have evidence of it all around the world, the cathedrals and the Byzantine and the medieval times, eras. Sorry about that. But anyways, it's just, to me, time to choose a side, and I choose to walk away from the world and go with God and follow where he leads me and where he wants to go, because like I said, I had a lot of religious trauma, but once I started to heal and started to read the Bible for myself and try to understand the context, if there's something in there, especially like Old Testament laws and things that doesn't sit right with me, I go and I look up what is the historical context, why were things explained in this way, and it helps to understand that a lot of the negative things people say about God and Jesus and all of that comes from bad experiences with the church, which I had, bad experiences with, the Pharisees and the hypocrites in the church, which I also experienced, and then misinterpretation of the scriptures or misinterpretation of the context of the scriptures. And so the more I read for myself, it's just a peaceful life, and it's so deep. The Bible is so deep, and there's just so many layers, and I read every day. I don't always read for hours every day, but I read every day, and I always find something new in there, and I always find something meaningful, and it really just explains the state of the world, what's going on in the world, and spiritual battle that we're here to fight. And again, I think there's a lot of problems with the churches, and I think that, many of the modern, like, church leaders um, are, you know, off base. They're not necessarily teaching the truth, or they're teaching like a watered down version. And people talk about Christian nationalism, which is actually a political movement. It's not really representative of Christianity as a whole or the teachings. It's a political movement with a lot of money behind it. So it's important to look at these things, and I just feel like God is calling his people back right now, and I felt that call, and I prayed that God would remove me from where I was, because I was not happy there. I just didn't feel like part of my community anymore. I didn't feel like I had a place in my community after many, many years of service, and now I'm in a very transitional place, and I don't really know what is next, but I do feel like that I want to talk and share more, and I guess I'm just kind of breaking the ice and doing a little bit of a catch up to where I'm at right now, because like I said, I haven't posted in a really long time. I've just been dealing with other things. So anyways, I just wanted to put that out there, and I will be praying for all of you, and praying for guidance and peace, and that God will work in people's hearts, and start calling people back. I know that a lot of people that I know, it's like people go out and party and do drugs and have sex and all these things, and it's fun in the moment, but I know, because I was a tarot reader, like, a lot of people are not really happy. They're maybe enjoying themselves, but they're not happy. They're not at peace. They don't feel good about themselves or their lives, or they're participating in things that they don't really want to be participating in. And there is freedom, but you have to come up out of that stuff, because true freedom comes from the path of following God and remembering, who we are and what our divine purpose is meant to be as a humans, as a stewards of this planet, to take care of each other and take care of the earth and live in love and love one another, love our neighbors. But so many people have just given in to ego, selfishness, narcissism, because that's what the culture demands, and I think that's why people are so conflicted and in so much pain, and I just think about the different friends that I've lost, and all these preventable deaths. It's just sad, and I just pray for my friends and my community. I really do. And I pray that people will find peace, that people will seek the truth, because if you seek, you will find. If you knock, the door will be open to you. And so I guess with that, I'm gonna get off of here for now and just say that I will talk to you soon. Take care.